that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
RuPaul is probably one of the most successful drag queens that has ever existed, along with being one of the most influential queer artists from recent decades, especially when it comes to his impact in the world of queer nightlife and the drag world itself. Although, if you're a big enough fan of the show, you will have noticed that the more you find out about who RuPaul truly is, the more his image tends to get sort of tarnished. With stories like the fracking allegations, controversial comments regarding trans queens competing on the show, or even stories from queens saying RuPaul doesn't really care about the contestants who compete on the show. What's resulted is that these days, most of the time, there isn't much support for Ru. Instead, the love from the fans goes towards the show itself and the queens that compete on it. In this video, I'm going to be talking about key moments surrounding the life and career of RuPaul Andre Charles, along with discussing some of his controversies and what we should take away from the story. When we think of RuPaul, the first thing that comes to our mind is of course RuPaul's Drag Race, which is no surprise. I mean, the show has been credited with being arguably the most influential queer show that has ever existed. There's no denying that Drag Race has broken many barriers, but the truth is that Drag Race would never have been able to achieve this if it wasn't for RuPaul breaking even larger barriers in the late 1980s and 1990s. RuPaul got his start in drag in the Atlanta scene.
All right, Atlanta, that hot Atlanta girl.
But would end up moving to New York City in 1987, where he ended up working largely at go-go bars with occasional appearances on a TV show called The Gong Show. By this point in RuPaul's life, he had already explored many different types of drag, especially after being part of his punk rock band called the Wee Wee Poles, where Ru would end up taking a liking to the gender bending type of drag. By the end of the 1980s, RuPaul was beginning to transform into the supermodel of the world that we see today. In 1989, RuPaul had his first big break when the B-52s invited him to be a part of the music video for their song Love Shack, where RuPaul would end up appearing in many scenes from the video. The band had met RuPaul by attending his shows in the gay nightlife of New York City. The song Love Shack would go on to peak at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The B-52s would later reunite with Ru on the set of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 9 Episode 2, where James Mansfield and Kimora Black would lip sync to their song Love Shack. Cindy Wilson, who's one of the members of the B-52s, said on a recent interview that she still thinks fondly of her time with RuPaul and is very happy for the success of RuPaul's Drag Race. In 1993, RuPaul released his first studio album called Supermodel of the World, and would then come out with his first single called Supermodel You Better Work, which ended up becoming a huge hit for RuPaul. Even MTV would play his video many times due to how popular the song got. It was quite the achievement at the time, as during the early 1990s, the music scene was largely dominated by other types of music genres. After the success of Supermodel You Better Work, it wouldn't take long before RuPaul released additional singles with his songs Back to My Roots and A Shade Shady Now Prance. Essentially, the moment RuPaul began to see momentum in his career, he started branding himself, which would play a pivotal role in the way his career would continue to grow in the following decade. In 1994, the momentum of RuPaul's sudden rise in fame landed him a modeling contract for MAC Cosmetics, where he embarked on the Viva Glam lipstick campaign to fight against HIV and AIDS. This was truly a historical moment in queer history. It would make RuPaul the first drag queen to ever be the face of MAC Cosmetics and be featured in such a large platform during a time where queer people were largely stigmatized by the public.
I bet you're all wearing MAC, right? Everybody say love. Put that in your compact and brush it.
Thanks to MAC Cosmetics, RuPaul's face was now appearing in billboards around the world. By 1996, RuPaul would have his first talk show called The RuPaul Show, which was the first time a show in the United States had a drag queen for a host. While filming the show, RuPaul was working alongside Michelle Visage, who by that point they had already been close friends for many years. The show was actually really successful and ended up lasting a total of 100 episodes, with the final one airing in 1998. 2 decades later, RuPaul would try to revive his talk show in 2019, this time calling it RuPaul. but it was ultimately cancelled after just a couple episodes. As for why, it just lacked a lot of entertainment value. Some of the guests were interesting, but the banter between Ru and his guests never felt organic. Anyways, once RuPaul started gaining fame in the early 90s, it began to shed a focus between pop culture and the art form of drag, with many queens from the community being contacted by mainstream outlets, including Joan Rivers, who infamously invited a set of club kid drag queens to her show so that they could display their art, due to the 90s being the height of the club kid era of drag. Basically, RuPaul's rise to fame also provided a rise in interest into drag culture as a whole. It also helped strengthen the gay nightlife scene and sort of built a stronger community among queer people. Now, Lady Bunny is also a drag queen that actually was roommates with Ru before they began doing drag. Lady Bunny would go on to create an event in 1984 called Wigstock, which centered around queer people gathering together to watch performances by queer artists such as drag queens. At first, not that many people would show up to the yearly event, but by the 1990s, there were thousands of people attending each year. The representation of drag in the media started to reach its peak in the 90s, when in 1995, the historical film To Wong Fu was released to the public, automatically becoming an important film in queer culture, as the story centered around main characters who were drag queens. As a side note, another important queer film is the 1990 movie Paris is Burning, which focused on the queer nightlife culture of voguing, telling the stories of many queens that lived in the 1980s ballroom culture. By the year 1999, RuPaul was awarded by the GLAAD Awards thanks to his contributions to promoting equality for the LGBT community. Specifically, one of the episodes of his talk show, RuPaul invited guests Chi LaRue and Tom Chase to talk about the gay porn industry, which was a super taboo topic to discuss on national television. I mean, it was even ingrained within the politics at the time, with people debating whether or not gay people should be allowed to openly serve in the army. And most of the society viewed gay people as dirty people. So to have Ru discussing gay porn on national television was quite a fierce move. I'm also glad that he was recognized for his trailblazing during this era of his life. By the late 90s, RuPaul and the art form of drag had gotten so popular that suddenly people stopped caring about it and slowly everything began to fade away. With RuPaul's talk show being cancelled and no big opportunities happening to RuPaul or any drag queen for that matter. It was the end of an era for Ru, and soon nobody was talking about him anymore. Fortunately, at the height of RuPaul's original fame in the 90s is when he'd make hundreds of thousands of dollars through the many collaborations and club bookings that he'd end up doing throughout the years. By the time the 2000s started, RuPaul was a millionaire, but his fame had long faded and he was no longer relevant to mainstream pop culture, or even gay culture if we're being completely honest. According to RuPaul, in the early 2000s, it seemed that the whole concept of the gay scene was dying, feeling that there was a strong sense of toxic masculinity within the gay community, which caused there to be a lot of misogyny towards feminine gay people and especially drag queens. But RuPaul hadn't given up on furthering his career. Yet by 2004, it was proving very difficult to find any big media outlet that wanted to work with Ru. When it comes down to the way RuPaul's career fizzled in the early 2000s, Ru says that at the end of the day, he understood that he was trying to find success in a world where everything was against him, due to being too gay and feminine to be on mainstream media, while at the same time being too feminine to be relevant in gay culture. Essentially, gay people were marginalized by straight people and drag queens were marginalized by gay people. In 2004, RuPaul released his third studio album called Red Hot, which didn't receive a lot of press coverage from the entertainment industry. In this interview, RuPaul is asked if he felt betrayed by the industry that was no longer treating him like a star, to which RuPaul actually had a really classy response to. In it, RuPaul says that he doesn't necessarily feel betrayed, but more so disappointed in the circumstances, saying, quote, "Nobody promises anything in show business, and you understand that from day one." He also says it was extremely difficult to get any press to report on his upcoming album due to a lot of them wanting him to act a certain way in order to appeal to a more heteronormative ideology. Essentially, RuPaul felt that not only was mainstream media not accepting him, but it was also gay media outlets who seemed to dislike RuPaul. Because the truth of the matter is that to them, RuPaul was no longer a big star. He was just some drag queen and they weren't gonna bend over backwards for him. It also shows how despite RuPaul opening the doors for many queer people in the early 90s, people still didn't provide him with an ounce of respect. It's hard to imagine what it's like to achieve your dreams and become a huge star, only for it all to go away and no one cares about you anymore. By 2008, RuPaul had formed a deal with Logo TV, a small channel owned by Viacom that largely focused on queer content. This meant that the first season of RuPaul's Drag Race would be airing on Logo TV. So, the production of Drag Race scouted queens from across the country, many of which RuPaul had already met in person by attending their shows in previous years. They formed a cast of 9 girls, and by the end of the season, they had crowned their first winner, Bibi Zahara Benet. While season 1 was filmed in 2008, it wouldn't begin airing until 2009, where it began to slowly gain some traction with the queer community. In this time period, Drag Race was sort of a subculture within the gay community. But as the years went by, the show got more popular and the rest is history. The show would go on to become a huge success with many queens coming out as stars. Yet among the many careers that RuPaul has helped launch with his show, there are also many queens that have had very public feuds with RuPaul, calling him out on so many different issues. Now, I wanted to talk about RuPaul's long-standing feud with Willem. As you know, for the years that followed Willem's disqualification on season 4, there were many times that he spoke out against the show by calling out the treatment of trans contestants, or defending Matthew Anderson online. Willem's constant callouts of the show culminated in his bridge with World of Wonder being burned to the ground, with there being zero hope that he'd ever be able to compete on Drag Race again. While RuPaul has never publicly spoke out against Willem, it's been implied in the Race Chaser podcast that RuPaul personally doesn't like Willem, with the infamous story of RuPaul driving by Willem and yelling at him from his car. Despite all this, contrary to popular belief, while Willem does disagree with many of the things that RuPaul has said and done, he recognizes that Ru helped pave the way for many queer people and that without RuPaul's Drag Race, Willem wouldn't have had a lot of the success that he has now. That being said, he feels it is important to call out Ru when he is clearly wrong regarding an issue, especially when it has to do with the queer community. What I enjoyed about the beginning of RuPaul and Willem's relationship was that it seemed that Ru had a decent amount of respect when it came to Willem's talent. I mean, while on the show, Willem was just so effortless with the way she'd managed to make most conversations about her, becoming a main storyline within the season. You could tell that RuPaul could see how talented Willem was, not only as a contestant on the show, but branding himself and delivering great one-liners for the show. Especially in the finale. I mean, as we know, Willem had been breaking a lot of rules behind the scenes that wasn't revealed in the finale. Despite RuPaul knowing this, she seemed to enjoy Willem, especially considering Willem was going to be on All Stars 1 but was shortlisted last minute. As to how things are now between Willem and World of Wonder, it doesn't seem like it could get any worse. Not only has it become apparent that RuPaul personally doesn't like Willem, but even RuPaul's DragCon is beginning to take jabs at Willem, with Willem expressing this past year that the organizers of DragCon were no longer granting Willem the huge discount that queens who've competed on Drag Race get when they buy a booth for DragCon weekend. This also comes as a result of Willem adamantly complaining about the show throughout every couple months. So I guess it makes sense why World of Wonder did that, but it's still a petty move for them to take away the Ru Girl discount. Subsequently, in 2020, one of Drag Race's official accounts posted a compilation of the most shocking eliminations from the franchise, but they failed to include Willem's disqualification from season 4, which was a clear jab at Willem as he obviously has one of the most shocking eliminations considering he was disqualified from the competition. But Willem has also said many times that he no longer needs Drag Race to further his career, with his most notable achievement being a part of the A Star Is Born film in 2019. which featured Lady Gaga and was nominated for an Oscar. But is Willam's adamant distaste towards the production of Drag Race enough for them to try to hide her legacy from the show? Let me know in the comments. Another queen that has had a difficult relationship with RuPaul is Pearl from season 7. Pearl competed on season 7 of Drag Race and would end up making it to the finals, placing as one of the runner-ups. On season 7, episode 5, the infamous moment between RuPaul and Pearl would take place when during one of the walkthroughs for the episode, RuPaul told Pearl she had no personality, to which Pearl gave a snarky remark and Ru began to stare her down in silence. After a couple seconds, Pearl said, quote, "Is there something on my face?" creating a new shift in the universe. RuPaul would end up discussing this moment in his podcast, What's the Tea? RuPaul says he initially wanted to react by telling Pearl to pack her bags and very much would have eliminated Pearl that same episode. But he thought to himself that Pearl was very attractive and that audiences would like that, so that's why he kept her around. And she wasn't all that wrong. I mean, fans would go on to go super crazy for Pearl, specifically because many considered him to be the most attractive queen out of drag from the season and even the franchise. We have to imagine as well that RuPaul is also one of the producers from the show, so he will constantly be thinking of what will make the show more entertaining to the viewer at home. The season before this, Milk had gotten very popular online for how attractive he looked out of drag, which in a way was a sort of new thing with the show. Pearl said that after the interview on Hey Queen, where she told the story of the interaction she had with RuPaul behind the scenes, where Ru told her, quote, "Nothing you say matters unless that camera is rolling," producers at World of Wonder contacted Pearl a couple days later and told her that because of what she said about RuPaul on Hey Queen, she would no longer be on All Stars in the future. The whole drama between World of Wonder and Pearl just felt so unnecessary all around. I mean, Pearl wasn't even trying to actively come for the show and the producers. To me, it just sort of seemed like a random shady comment that she decided to throw in for the interview. So it was for sure disheartening that the situation was elevated to the point of producers reaching out specifically to tell Pearl she would no longer be on the show again. Many queens have given different takes on this story, from queens agreeing with what Pearl said to others saying that they had the opposite experience with RuPaul and that perhaps Ru was truly just giving Pearl some Hollywood wisdom. Now, one of the most damaging pieces of drama that RuPaul has gotten himself into was regarding his stance on trans queens competing on the show, citing in 2018 that he felt Drag Race was a place for cis gay men to compete in, because the whole point of drag is the transformation. This was met with a lot of backlash from the public, with RuPaul being accused of being transphobic. Some of the arguments made against his statements was that the trans community has had a large impact in the world of drag, especially when it comes to the world of pageantry. In fact, the most notable drag queen pageant in the United States is called Miss Continental, and it's the most prestigious title you can win as a drag queen. The pageant has gone on for over 40 years, and all queens who have won have been trans queens, with the only two queens who weren't being Naysha Lopez in 2013 and Brooklyn Heights in 2014. A fun fact is that the winner of Miss Continental 2019 was Vanessa Van Cartier, who would end up winning Drag Race Holland Season 2 and is the drag mother of Envy Peru. RuPaul would end up doubling down on his comments regarding trans queens not being allowed to compete on the show and comparing them to athletes who take steroids in order to get ahead in the competition, which only made things worse. The show then tried to fix all this by inviting Gia Gunn back for All Stars 4, as she'd be the first openly trans contestant to compete on the show and be female presenting in confessionals. Although, as I said in my Gia Gunn video, she did end up confronting RuPaul regarding his comments during one of the walkthroughs for the episode, but RuPaul denied he ever said anything transphobic and that he's always been a strong supporter for the community. The show would end up cutting this from the final edit of the season. Although it's thanks to all this that the show did inevitably widen its casting selection, with now every season seemingly trying to find a new gag in regards to a surprise type of contestant. Now, out of the criticisms that the fans have had with RuPaul, some of the minor things that get brought up is how he constantly forgets the name of the queens who competed on the show. RuPaul forgetting queens' names has been an ongoing theme throughout the years. This isn't anything new, with stories as far back as the filming of All Stars 2, where Jeremy Carey, aka Fifi O'Hara, said that during the filming of All Stars 2 episode 1, someone mentioned Jaden Dior Fierce, who had just competed on season 7, but RuPaul had no idea idea who the queens were talking about. There was also that infamous moment in the podcast What's the Tea, where in just 3 months after Evie Oddly had won season 11, RuPaul forgot who he had just crowned and mistakenly thought that Brooklyn Heights won the season.
I need to hear.
So what, Canadian, obviously.
I am Canadian.
Yeah.
Sure.
So what does Brooklyn Heights do? Did she win?
She won.
She did win.
No, she didn't. She did not win. Evie Oddly won.
Evie Oddly won,
so
yes.
what does she do?
I don't think he's actively engaging in Drag Race content the way us fans do. It's a lot easier to remember the queens' names when you see them on social media all the time. Also, RuPaul has a lot more important things to worry about when he's filming like 10 seasons a year, and seemingly has to replace a new production member every 3rd year. Another prevalent criticism is the inconsistency between what RuPaul preaches on the show versus the way RuPaul will react to situations in real life. For instance, one of the main ideologies RuPaul shares is a sort of pacifist mindset, where you should aim to always respond to everything with love and understand that everyone is battling their inner saboteur. Yet in a podcast episode from What's the Tea, there was a moment where RuPaul spoke out about how he's sort of faking the persona of being a wise mentor filled with positivity, and it's more like a character that he plays for the show. Which is completely understandable. I mean, reality TV is meant to have different characters and play different roles, so if Ru likes to accentuate that part of himself for the show, then so be it. But I do think that a lot of what we see from Ru is his genuine self. I mean, Ru has always been a preacher for a lot of his life. Interviews even from the 90s are filled with Ru saying things as if he was a mentor, and is essentially a personality trait that he'd end up honing into once he began to film Drag Race. The next thing fans don't like about Ru is the seemingly lack of activism that has been displayed in recent years. For example, when the Black Lives Matters movement was reaching its height in the summer of 2020, it was the main topic of conversation in both the United States and most of the world. During this time, many big influencers were being urged to speak out about the Black Lives Matter movement to show their support for the cause. So naturally, when one of the biggest names in the queer world was silent on the issue, fans were quick to criticize. This is a very complicated issue, but I never understood why everyone was so quick to drag RuPaul, especially when he was a queer person of color himself. Then again, RuPaul's stance on the concept of racism has always seemed a little flimsy, with his response to the Charlottesville attack in 2017, where a woman was murdered after a white nationalist drove his car into a group of peaceful protesters. RuPaul tweeted a day later citing that racism is the fruit of each individual's ego, which was a weird take to have. Subsequently, a year prior to this, RuPaul discussed his thoughts on the Black Lives Matter movement and seemed to have mixed feelings on whether he was supportive of the movement or not, feeling that the violence may not have been the solution to their problems. So it's clear that when it comes to RuPaul and some of the main social issues facing our community, there seems to be a clear lack of perspective and knowledge. RuPaul also got into heat for the blame it on the edit situation, with RuPaul consistently expressing there's no such thing as an edit. The show is simply compiling moments where the queen said everything that's being shown to the audience. While it's clear that RuPaul's song Blame It on the Edit was a jab at all the queens who've spoken out against how the show treated them, the truth is that the edits themselves were in a way never the issue. It was the fans. I mean, having a villain storyline in a reality TV show adds a lot more layers to the storylines between contestants and can lead up to some really great tense moments that will end up as highlights for the season. Therefore, while the edit does play a role in the way most queens will come across, the real issue is the fans who will watch Drag Race and then focus all of their anger on the queens they don't like and proceed to bullying them online. I mean, all it took for Silky was for her to be really annoying on one episode for fans to absolutely hate her. Like, I rewatched season 11 recently, and aside from episode 1, Silky was actually pretty tame for the rest of the season. There was times where she did blow up and it was sort of funny, but it never reached the level of annoyance of episode 1. Yet fans already labeled Silky as the annoying queen from season 11, so they carried that grudge against her for the entirety of the season. By the time Silky got to the finale, she had already given up because she knew she wasn't going to win the season after the way fans received her. Having edits on the show that sort of makes certain queens seem a little bit shadier most of the time really does have a very good effect in terms of entertainment quality of the season. It really sucks that it seems they're having to deviate from that because fans aren't able to celebrate queens who provide good TV. On a lighter note, in 2018, RuPaul would end up getting into some drama with none other than Azealia Banks. The issue stemmed after RuPaul released his latest album in March 2017, which featured a song titled Call Me Mother, which would end up becoming one of RuPaul's most successful songs. However, in 2018, Azealia took to Twitter to call out RuPaul for ripping off the song Call Me Mother from her song The Big Big Beat. While I won't be playing either of these songs in this video, I can honestly say that the two tracks do sound extremely similar to one another. But I do have a bias for RuPaul's because I think the lyrics were a lot more catchy and fun. Regardless, this would lead to RuPaul's album American being removed from Spotify as the investigation continued. Azealia then said that she was filing a lawsuit against RuPaul and went on to post a series of controversial tweets. The drama would conclude a couple weeks later with all the songs in RuPaul's new album becoming available to the public again, and then everyone just sort of moved on. Moving on, a couple years ago, the topic of RuPaul and the fracking farms went viral, with fans criticizing RuPaul for preaching on Drag Race about climate change and saving the environment while he's allowing land he owns to be fracked for minerals. If you don't know what fracking is, to put it in simple terms, is when a bunch of liquid is pumped at high pressure into the ground with the hopes of finding resources such as oil or gas. However, it is a very harmful thing to do to the environment as it contaminates not only the land but has been shown to impact large bodies of water as well. For a long time, the fracking allegations were used as the #1 reason to dislike RuPaul. But Bob the Drag Queen has argued many times on his podcast, Sibling Rivalry, that the fans shouldn't be pointing the finger at RuPaul because the fracking farms stem from RuPaul's husband's family, and that the fracking business from RuPaul's husband's family extends far beyond his relationship with Ru. So therefore, Ru shouldn't be held accountable for it. In regards to famous drag queens, most of the queens who became superstars such as Trixie Mattel, Shangela, or Bob the Drag Queen still owe a lot of their success to the exposure that came from competing on Drag Race. Yet, Pablo Vittar, a drag queen from Brazil, has been able to achieve international fame all on his own, becoming a worldwide famous singer. For many years, RuPaul was the most followed drag queen on Instagram, with no other Drag Race queen surpassing her, until Pablo Vittar eventually surpassed RuPaul in the amount of social media followers that they had. Fans speculated that RuPaul was bitter about this after RuPaul blocked the fan that posted about how Pablo had surpassed RuPaul in Instagram followers, and that RuPaul was no longer the most followed drag queen in the world. I'd like to point out that RuPaul doesn't really have a strong social media presence the way that most queens do. I feel that if Ru was actually posting interesting content, then he'd have a lot more followers. So while it was a gag that Pablo surpassed Ru in social media followers, it also wasn't a surprise. I feel like especially when it comes to younger fans of the show, they may not fully grasp just the amount of impact that the franchise of RuPaul's Drag Race has had not only with pop culture, but in the shaping of gay nightlife around the world. I mean, before Drag Race, there wasn't a lot of entertainment designed specifically for gay people, and the ones that did exist were not that popular. Also, while drag queens did exist back then, they weren't anywhere near as popular as they would end up getting when RuPaul's Drag Race began airing. It was an art form that many either didn't understand or didn't know about. RuPaul's Drag Race would also end up creating a new market for people to be able to build their own business around the show. The platform created by the show RuPaul's Drag Race consistently showcases the stories from marginalized individuals, such as trans women and men, non-binary people, different ethnicities, and many more. Whether or not this is being done out of the goodness of their hearts or simply just virtue signaling, there's no denying that the very actions of having these stories be displayed to millions of people around the world is an overall good thing for queer culture. It's also important to understand that it's because of the market that RuPaul's Drag Race has created surrounding the art form of drag, it has helped revive gay nightlife around the globe. I can understand being critical of RuPaul given some of the things that he's said and done, but the level of hate towards Ru that many fans have reached is beyond disagreeing with someone's actions and pretty much just wanting to cancel them altogether. I mean, in 2019, Trinity the Tuck did a series on Instagram where she honored every winner that existed up to that point. a series where she took on the style of each winner and merged it with her own drag. Trinity would conclude the series by making a post that honored RuPaul, to which fans got super upset, criticizing Trinity for supporting RuPaul in any way. It went as far as Trinity having to disable comments because the fans were spreading nothing but hate. It is clear that a big portion of the fan base seems reluctant in wanting to treat RuPaul as the antagonist in the Drag Race legacy. RuPaul has said that many times the very act of someone that identifies as a man putting on a wig and makeup to be a drag queen is something that defies the status quo of society and is a political statement in itself. At the end of the day, similar to what happened to Ru in the 90s, the explosion of the Drag Race franchise over the past decade and a half will one day reach its end. We just don't know when. Essentially, the story of RuPaul Andre Charles is one of the most important things that has ever happened to the LGBT community. The impact that he's had on gay culture will be hard for anyone to ever outmatch. It's also true that in recent years, RuPaul has made many different statements that had many of us questioning his moral guideline. Yet when it really comes down to it, his positive actions vastly outweigh the controversial things he said. It's also important that we celebrate people while they're still alive, instead of waiting until they're no longer in this world for us to celebrate them as the legend that they were. Think about how RuPaul's career goes far beyond the show RuPaul's Drag Race and is the story of a queer person of color that broke down barriers for future generations, changing the lives of many people for the better. Before we end this, I wanted to say thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. It really helps support the channel. And honestly, Scentbird's products are actually pretty good, so I strongly urge you guys go check them out by clicking the links in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've actually been working on this one for quite a while, so it's awesome to finally have it done. I hope you guys are having a great summer, and if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at GreenGay22. I'll see you guys next time.